Why is South Africa experiencing more deadly floods? Historically, South Africa has experienced seasonal rains, particularly in the summer months. However, the floods seen in recent years have been unprecedented in both intensity and frequency. According to meteorologists, rainfall in parts of the Eastern Cape reached more than 3 times the average in just 48 hours. Rivers burst their banks and saturated hillsides gave way, engulfing entire neighborhoods in mud and debris. Experts attribute this alarming trend to the global climate crisis. Warmer air holds more moisture, leading to heavier downpours. In addition, rising sea temperatures affect regional weather systems, bringing erratic weather patterns and prolonged storm systems. Climate scientists warn that South Africa is warming at twice the global average, making it one of the world's most climate-vulnerable nations. The combination of poor urban planning, deforestation, informal settlements on floodplains, and aging infrastructure further amplifies the risks. In some areas, stormwater systems have not been upgraded since the apartheid era, making them ill-equipped to manage today's climate realities. How are communities coping with loss and displacement? For those affected, the numbers only scratch the surface of the devastation. Entire families have lost everything. In the township of Motherwell outside Gqeberha, formerly Port Elizabeth, residents described watching helplessly as water swallowed homes and possessions. "The water came in like a wall," said Nomsa Nchuli, a 42-year-old mother of 3. "Within minutes, our house was gone. All I could do was grab my children and run." Relief efforts have been underway, but coordination has been uneven. The South African National Defence Force, SANDF, was deployed to assist with rescue and recovery, while the Department of Social Development opened emergency shelters. Yet, many flood victims report delays in receiving food, water, and blankets. In some informal settlements, aid has yet to arrive at all. Children are particularly vulnerable in these settings. With schools damaged or closed, and families living in cramped temporary shelters, education and mental health suffer. Medical experts also warn of a looming public health crisis, with rising risks of waterborne diseases such as cholera and typhoid. Local NGOs have stepped in where the government response has faltered. Organizations like Gift of the Givers and Doctors Without Borders have been distributing food, water, and medical aid. But these efforts highlight another systemic issue: over-reliance on NGOs to fill governance gaps in times of crisis. What does this mean for Africa's preparedness in an era of climate instability? The floods in South Africa are part of a larger pattern now visible across the continent. From deadly droughts in the Horn of Africa to rising sea levels threatening West African coastal cities, the climate crisis is accelerating Africa's exposure to extreme weather events. Yet, many countries lack the financial, infrastructural, and political capacity to respond effectively. In South Africa, the floods have exposed serious weaknesses in disaster preparedness and urban planning. While the government has made commitments under the Paris Climate Agreement and adopted a climate change bill in 2022, implementation has been slow and underfunded. Early warning systems remain underdeveloped and community-based disaster training is minimal. Experts argue that South Africa, and Africa more broadly, must treat climate adaptation as a national security priority. This includes investing in climate-resilient infrastructure, like flood-proof housing and upgraded drainage systems, expanding insurance coverage for vulnerable households and farmers, developing early warning systems that reach rural and marginalized communities, and integrating climate education into schools and local governments. The African Union has called for stronger coordination between member states on climate resilience, but meaningful progress remains limited. The South Africa floods should serve as a wake-up call for regional action, cross-border cooperation, and bold leadership. Survivor voices a crisis in their own words. Thabo Makona, a 67-year-old pensioner in Mthatha, watched his home of 40 years collapse as the river rose. I've lived through storms before, but never like this. This wasn't rain. This was a punishment. And no one warned us. Beulah Dlamini, a school teacher, now lives in a church hall with 23 other displaced residents. I teach environmental science, and I tell my students climate change is real. But now, they've seen it with their own eyes. Their homes gone. Their books lost. These voices underscore a reality that no chart or forecast can fully capture, that climate change is not tomorrow's problem. It is today's emergency. What must happen next? While the waters may recede, the long-term consequences of this disaster are just beginning. The reconstruction process will take years, and many families may never recover what was lost. But there is also an opportunity, if the government, civil society, and international partners act decisively. South Africa must launch an independent review of its flood response to identify what failed and how to improve. Fast-track investment in climate adaptation and local infrastructure upgrades. Ensure equitable disaster relief so that poor and rural communities are not left behind. Collaborate with international donors and agencies to mobilize resources for long-term resilience building. Climate change will continue to test South Africa's strength and unity. Whether the country rises to the challenge will depend on the actions taken in this critical moment. Conclusion: a nation at a crossroads. The 2025 floods in the Eastern Cape are a defining moment for South Africa, not just because of the destruction, but because of what they reveal about the country's vulnerability and resilience. They show us the fragility of lives built along riverbanks and in underserved settlements, and the urgent need to rebuild with climate in mind. If there is one lesson from this crisis, it is that the climate emergency is not a distant headline, it is in our backyards, our homes, and our futures. What happens next will determine whether South Africa emerges stronger or remains trapped in a cycle of disaster and delayed response. The time for action is not next year. It is now.